Everyone's heard the phrase, your life flashes before your eyes. Most people assume that's just a saying, something poetic, not something real. But scientists have actually measured what happens inside your brain in the final moments before death. And the truth is stranger, and somehow more comforting, than the saying ever suggested. Your body also does a handful of things afterward that almost nobody knows about. Some of them genuinely surprising. One of them a complete myth you've probably believed your whole life. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. For decades, doctors assumed the brain simply shuts down at the moment of death. Power off, lights out, nothing left. That assumption started to crack in 2013 when researchers at the University of Michigan were recording brain activity in rats and noticed something odd almost by accident. In the 30 seconds after the rats' hearts stopped, their brains produced a sudden burst of gamma waves, the fastest, most synchronized type of brainwave there is, at levels that actually exceeded what the same brains produced while fully awake. That early result was strange enough on its own, but in 2023, the same lab found something even more striking in actual dying human patients whose brain activity was being monitored in hospital. Right after their hearts stopped, two of the patients showed the same kind of gamma surge, and in one of them, the activity spiked to roughly 300 times its normal level. The activity was especially concentrated in a region called the temporoparietal junction, located just behind the ear, an area strongly linked to vision, memory, and dreaming. In other words, in the last seconds, parts of the dying brain looked more active than they do in everyday waking life. One researcher described it almost like a building catching fire. The brain shutting the door to the outside world and throwing everything it has left into one final, internal burst of activity. Scientists think this surge might be the actual biological explanation behind life flashing before your eyes, not poetry, but a real, measurable spike in the exact brain regions linked to memory and vision, firing all at once in the final seconds. Nobody knows for certain what, if anything, a person experiences during that burst. But the fact that it happens at all rewrites what doctors used to assume about the dying brain. There's a phrase hospice nurses have repeated for generations. Hearing is the last sense to go. For years it was treated as a comforting guess, not a fact. Something nurses noticed again and again, a small movement or a change in breathing when a familiar voice spoke, but with no real proof behind it. Then researchers actually tested it. They played sounds to hospice patients while measuring their brainwaves with EEG, once while the patients were still conscious, and again after they'd become completely unresponsive in their final hours of life. The setup was simple but clever. Patients heard a sequence of ordinary tones with the occasional unexpected one mixed in, the same kind of test used to study attention and awareness in healthy brains. Specifically, researchers were looking for two types of brain response. One automatic, almost reflexive reaction to a sound being different, and a second, more complex response that's normally linked to consciously noticing something. Even in patients who could no longer respond to anything around them, many brains still produce the simpler of these two responses, and some even produce the more complex one too, nearly matching the patterns seen in fully healthy, conscious people. The results were remarkable. Even after patients could no longer respond to anything around them, their brains were still reacting to sound in almost the same way as a healthy person's brain would. Their auditory system was still working right up to the edge of life. Researchers still can't say for certain whether the person is aware of what they're hearing. But the brain is clearly still listening. It's part of why hospice professionals encourage families to keep talking to a loved one, even once they've stopped responding. The voice might still be getting through, long after everything else has gone quiet. So the brain goes out in a blaze of activity and hearing holds on the longest. But what happens to the rest of the body? It turns out your body keeps doing things for hours afterward. And one of them is something you've probably already experienced yourself, without ever dying. Within about 15 to 20 minutes, the body starts to visibly pale. This is called pallor mortis, and it happens simply because blood stops moving through the tiny vessels just under the skin. No more circulation means no more color. At the same time, the body starts cooling down. This isn't random. It happens at a fairly steady, measurable rate, dropping by roughly 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit every hour, until it matches the temperature of the room. It's so predictable that investigators actually use it to estimate how long someone has been dead. Then, somewhere between 2 and 6 hours later, the muscles begin to stiffen. This is rigor mortis, and it peaks at around 12 hours after death. Here's the part most people don't expect. It doesn't last. After about 2 days, the stiffness fades again, and the muscles relax once more, as the tissues holding them rigid start to break down. The eyes change too, in a way most people never think about. Within about an hour, the cornea, the clear front surface of the eye, starts to lose its transparency and turns slightly hazy, simply because it's no longer being kept moist and nourished. It's a small, quiet change, but it's reliable enough that examiners can use it to help estimate how much time has passed. Every one of these timings shifts depending on the situation. A warmer room speeds nearly all of it up, a colder one slows it down, and factors like body size or clothing change the pace too, which is exactly why investigators treat these as estimates and ranges, not fixed countdowns. And here's a fact you've almost certainly heard that simply isn't true. Hair and nails do not keep growing after death. What actually happens is the skin dehydrates and pulls back, retracting around the base of the hair and nails. It only looks like they've grown, because everything around them has shrunk. But the strangest one of all is the most relatable. Because of that same muscle stiffening process, dead bodies can actually get goosebumps. The tiny muscles at the base of each hair follicle stiffen up exactly the way they do when you're cold or frightened while alive. Which means one of the most ordinary sensations you've felt 1,000 times is also one of the last things your body does, completely involuntarily, after you're already gone. So the saying turns out to be more true than anyone expected. Your brain really might light up one last time, and your hearing might be the last thing tethering you to the room. Your body, meanwhile, carries on with its own quiet routine for hours afterward, paling, cooling, stiffening, and finally relaxing again, all without you. Even the small things like goosebumps don't actually stop when you do. They just stop needing you to be there for it.